Welcome back, brothers, to Warhammer. Tonight we're diving into the lore and history of the Grey Knights, which is perhaps the most secretive Space Marines. Before I get into madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. I want to thank you guys for support. I've been killing it. Now, let's get to the madness.
By the time the last bastion guns fell silent, the world had already begun to die in ways no sane tactician could name. The fortress lines had not been broken by armor, nor by massed artillery, nor by the old and comprehensible engines of rebellion. They had been unmade from within, their bastions drowned beneath howling etheric fire and impossible manifestations that poured shrieking through the rent veil between the material realm and the nightmare ocean beyond it. Men of the Astra Militarum, who had stood firm against greenskin tides and traitor sieges, now cast down their rifles and clawed at their own faces as blood rained upward into a sky split by malignant light. Priests screamed litanies until their throats burst, only for the echoes of their faith to be answered by laughter from things with no right to possess voices. Tank columns burned with witch flame that left ceramite untouched and yet cooked the crews to bursting ruin within. Sanctioned psychers detonated like overripe fruit beneath the pressure of a malign presence pressing from the dark between stars. The old instruments of imperial war had not merely failed, they had become irrelevant. Against an enemy that walked from blasphemy into flesh, against claws born of sacrilege and mouths that spoke in dead men's memories, the valor of common soldiery was transformed into little more than a formal prelude to annihilation. And so the question rises, as it has risen on 10,000 worlds at the brink of soul death, though few who ask it survive long enough to hear the answer. Who wars upon the foe that should not exist at all? Who is summoned when reality itself has become the battlefield, when the air is rank with incense and cordite, and yet still tastes of copper and damnation, when the enemy is not merely hostile life, but a spiritual contagion given teeth? The Imperium of man is vast beyond mortal comprehension, and within its endless hierarchies, there are 1,000 answers for rebellion, invasion, insurrection, and Xenos predation. There are chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, whose names are hymns of terror to the foes of mankind. There are Titan legions that stride like iron gods. There are Inquisitors, whose word can scour continents to ash. Yet when the impossible manifests in truth, when demons tread the soil of man and the laws of creation are mocked in open daylight, even these mighty instruments are often only the first layer of sacrifice. In such hours, there are whispers, half remembered by the dying and erased from the minds of the living, of argent figures walking unburned through warp fire, of warriors whose coming is heralded not by triumphal fanfare, but by silence, censorship, and the cold certainty that those who witness salvation too clearly may not be permitted to remember it. Across the breadth of the Imperium, from shrine world catacombs to voidship reliquaries, there persist rumors so tightly strangled by decree that they survive only as fevered fragments. Some call them silver ghosts, some mutter of the Emperor's hidden angels. Some among the oldest adepts of forbidden archives speak of a blade kept sheathed until the hour of uttermost need, a brotherhood so secret that entire regiments have died without knowing who fought beside them. Most subjects of the throne will live and die never learning that such warriors are real. Most planetary governors, most admirals, most cardinals, even many among the high command of the Imperium, know of demonic incursion only in the most fractured and censored form, and of the warriors who answer such abominations, they know less still. Their existence is not celebrated in public triumphs. Their heraldry is not proclaimed from cathedral spires. Their victories are rarely recorded, except in the sealed annals of those permitted to know the black truths of the warp. Where other chapters of Space Marines are legends of glory, wrath, lineage, and conquest, these warriors are something far more terrible and far more necessary. They are a concealed sanction, a last answer, a secret too dangerous for the common mind to bear, because the truth of the foe they hunt is itself a poison to the soul of the Imperium. They are the Grey Knights. To call them merely Space Marines is to speak a truth so incomplete that it borders on falsehood. They are not fashioned for crusade in the conventional sense, nor for the stern but comprehensible wars that define the existence of other Adeptus Astartes chapters. They are not empire builders, nor exemplars cast into the sight of the masses to stir devotion through spectacle. They are not the mailed fist hurled at alien citadels or rebel fortresses to proclaim imperial might. They are a weapon withheld, hoarded in sanctified secrecy by those few within the Imperium who understand that there are enemies against which conventional heroism is not enough. When the taint of the warp blossoms into open rupture, when cult and possession are unholy, summoning have matured into a full demonic infestation, when reality grows thin and the veil is wounded, it is then that this hidden brotherhood is loosed. The Grey Knights serve as the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus, the demon-hunting arm of the Inquisition, charged with confronting the darkest manifestations of chaos. That bond explains much of the veil that covers them. They do not stride openly beneath the banners of imperial remembrance, because their wars are bound to truths that the Imperium has spent millennia burying beneath dogma, fear, and strategic ignorance. Their very deployment is an admission that the foe is not merely material, but metaphysical, not merely rebellious, but infernal. When at last they are seen, the sight has the quality of revelation and execution all at once. They come in armor the color of stormlit silver, warded plates of blessed metal, wrought not only to turn blade and shot, but to bear sigils of abjuration and wards against the filth of the immaterium. Upon those argent surfaces are inscribed scriptures of banishment, litanies of contempt, and runic protections whose purpose is as much spiritual as ballistic. In their gauntlets they bear sanctified bolters that do not merely kill flesh, but carry death into things sustained by nightmare and malign sorcery. At their sides, and in their two-handed grips, are the famed nemesis force weapons, blades, halberds, hammers, and other sacred implements through which disciplined psychic wrath may be focused into annihilating purpose. Theirs is not the pageantry of knightly ornament, but the harsh and functional iconography of a brotherhood made for one impossible war. Even their bearing is unlike that of other Astartes. There is less of the feral glory of assault, less of the vaunting pride of transhuman conquerors, and more of the solemnity of executioners approaching a condemned and unclean altar. They are radiant not with hope, but with judgment. To behold them is to understand, even without full knowledge, that a threshold has been crossed, and that the foe now present is so dire that only hidden masters of a forbidden discipline could be entrusted to destroy it. For demon war is not won by steel and fire alone, though both remain necessary. It is fought in the unseen dimensions of will, faith, soul, memory, terror, and corruption. A demon does not simply occupy space. It intrudes upon meaning. It infects prayer, language, perception, and identity. It can seduce as readily as it can dismember. It can break a fortress by breaking the mind of the sentry upon the wall. It can turn devotion into fanatic murder, courage into despair, and memory into treasonous dream. Against such a foe, mere physical superiority is not enough. Purity, discipline, and psychic mastery become weapons no less vital than armor and ammunition. Here the Grey Knights stand apart from almost every other chapter in the Adeptus Astartes, for every single Grey Knight is a psyker, not a rare librarian set among conventional brethren, not an exceptional mutation tolerated for battlefield utility, but an entire brotherhood in which psychic talent is universal, cultivated, sanctified, and bound in adamantine discipline. This truth alone renders them singular. They fight the creatures of the warp by mastering the very medium from which such horrors arise, turning the immaterium from a source of corruption into an instrument of righteous destruction. Their minds are bastions, their souls are honed into blades. Their training does not merely teach them how to kill demons, it teaches them how not to become what they kill. This is why their war can never be entirely public, and why their victories so often vanish into redacted archives and funeral pyres. The Imperium cannot easily endure the truth that the universe is infested not merely with hostile species and traitor empires, but with predatory unreality that can be summoned through weakness, sin, ambition, or despair. Nor can it openly exalt a warrior brotherhood whose methods require intimate knowledge of that abyss, whose very existence confirms that there are truths too dangerous for common faith to encounter unmediated. Thus, the Grey Knights remain behind curtains of total secrecy, their names spoken only in vaults sealed by inquisitorial authority, their fortress on Titan veiled within the innermost bastions of the Sol system, their deeds known in full only to the Ordo Malleus and a tiny scattering of the highest imperial echelons. They descend, they banish, they purge, and afterward memory itself is often treated as contaminated ground. Yet their necessity is beyond dispute. Without them, worlds would not merely fall, they would be spiritually devoured. Without them, the hidden war would become an open apocalypse. And so, the silver-armored demon hunters endure as the Emperor's secret blade, drawn only against the blackest horrors of the warp. But such a weapon invites another question, one older and darker than any battlefield report. From what desperate hour was such a chapter born, and what truth was so terrible that it had to be hidden from the entire galaxy? The Imperium did not emerge from the Horus heresy victorious. It crawled from that age of betrayal, half-flayed, half-blinded, and already beginning to harden into the wounded empire it would remain for the next 10,000 years. In the final ruined days, when the palace walls still smoked, and the blood of gene-forged demigods had not yet dried upon the stone of terror, one truth stood naked amidst the wreckage. Chaos had not been a passing contamination. It had not been a temporary madness that would burn itself out with the death of Horus and the flight of the traitor hosts. It was older than rebellion, deeper than treason, and infinitely more patient than mortal empire. The warp had not merely armed the arch-traitor. It had reached into the arteries of the Imperium and shown with hideous clarity that mankind stood upon the lip of an abyss it had barely begun to understand. Whole legions had been dragged into damnation. Entire worlds had been spiritually gutted before they were physically conquered. The old dream of a purely material war, of banners and fortresses and fleets locked in rational contest, had died screaming. When the last guns of the heresy thundered into silence, the Emperor and Malcador understood that the species would require more than rebuilt armies and fresh walls. It would require a weapon fashioned specifically for the hidden enemy beyond the veil. The Grey Knights were created in that hour by the Emperor with the aid of Malcador the Sigillite, not as merely stronger space marines, but as mankind's purpose-forged answer to the demonic and the ruinous. That necessity is what sets their origin apart from every other chapter in the long and bloody history of the Adeptus Astartes. The Imperium already possessed transhuman warriors of unmatched fury. It possessed the shattered remnants of legions that could still break continents and scour continents bare. Yet the heresy had proven that brute strength alone was no shield against the powers of the Immaterium. Some of the mightiest of the Emperor's own sons had fallen. Whole brotherhoods bred for conquest and iron obedience had become puppets of things that wore faith like a wound and temptation like a crown. What was needed now was not another crusading host, nor a replacement legion clad in old honors. What was needed was a brotherhood conceived from the beginning for a different war, a war of banishment, warding, psychic discipline, incorruptibility, and secret knowledge. It needed to be hidden because the truth of its purpose was itself dangerous. It needed to be exact because a demon hunter who faltered would become a gateway rather than a guardian. It needed to be born not from public triumph, but from sealed necessity, from the cold recognition that the galaxy had changed forever, and that mankind would never again be free of the warp's predation. This was the dark arithmetic of the age that followed the heresy. The Imperium did not simply require defenders, it required custodians of a forbidden war. At the center of that hidden labor stood Malcador the Sigillite, regent of terror, master of sealed orders, keeper of the Emperor's most dangerous contingencies, and the one man in the crumbling Imperium, ruthless and far-seeing enough to gather what this new order required. Before the last act of the heresy had fully played itself out, he had already been assembling chosen warriors from the broken remains of the age. Some had once fought beneath loyal banners, some had been born of legions that had gone traitor and yet had themselves refused damnation. They came from the secretive body known as the Knights Errant, warriors tested not merely in battle, but in faith, character, endurance, silence, and absolute devotion to the Emperor's final purpose. Malcador led these chosen men before the master of mankind himself, and from that terrible audience, the design of the chapter took shape. Of the 12 brought into that hidden design, 8 were Space Marines, and it was these 8 who would form the martial core of the new Brotherhood. In later ages, they would be remembered as the Titans, not merely because they were taken to Titan, but because they stood as the first sacred lineage of the Order, the original exemplars from whom the chapter's Council of Grand Masters would derive its most ancient tradition. They were not the founders of a realm. They were the first wardens of an unseen frontier. From among those 8, one was set above the others. Before he departed to meet his final burden upon Terra, Malcador selected Janus to lead the nascent Brotherhood and continue the work that the Sigillite himself would not live to complete. So Janus became the first Supreme Grand Master, first among the hidden lords of Titan, first bearer of a lineage that would continue through 10 millennia of silent war. Yet even Janus was a being born of heresy-era mystery. Later lore, sealed in deeper strata of the Imperium's memory and touched by the strange alchemy of the siege, identifies him with Revuel Arvida of the Thousand Suns, who through esoteric events became Ianius, and in time was remembered as Janus. That detail binds the Grey Knights irrevocably to the wreckage of the old legions. Their first lord was not a clean creation of peacetime institution, but a figure forged out of the broken, paradoxical, sorcerous twilight of the heresy itself. There is a harsh poetry in that. The first master of the demon hunters arose from a legion once damned by suspicion and ruin, and was remade into the foremost guardian against the warp. Such things are possible only in the aftermath of apocalypse, when history is not written so much as cauterized. Then came Titan, not merely a moon of Saturn, not merely a fortress location chosen for strategic convenience, but a sanctuary prepared for one of the most secret works in the history of mankind. Upon that hidden world, Malcador oversaw the first shaping of the chapter, and when the hour came for him to return to Terra and surrender himself to the fate awaiting the Emperor's last and greatest servants, the Sigillite enacted his final warding. Titan was not left merely cloaked by stealth and denial. The whole moon was concealed within the shifting tides of the Immaterium, shielded by mighty wards, macrogellar protections, and sigillic rites so intricate that they surpassed all but Malcador's own sorcerous genius. Thus was Titan removed from the sight of the galaxy. While Terra burned, while the Emperor suffered his mortal wounding, while the traitor hosts broke and fled, and the Imperium began its long petrification into dogma and grief, Titan endured beyond the ordinary flow of time, hidden in the warp, yet guarded against its hunger. This concealment is one of the defining acts of Grey Knight myth, because it is there that history ceases to feel wholly chronological and becomes liturgical. Titan did not simply vanish, it entered a consecrated absence. Within that absence the chapter was raised. For those in real space, only years passed amid the wreck and reformation of the post-heresy Imperium. For those upon Titan, far more subjective time was granted. Decades could be spent in preparation, while the wider Imperium lurched through the first agonies of the New Age. Recruits gathered by Malcador could be hardened, instructed, tested, and transformed. Rites of purity could be established. Libraries of demon lore could be assembled beneath seals of blood and oath. Brotherhoods could be trained not merely in battlecraft, but in the higher and more terrible disciplines of warding, banishment, and psychic war. The 8 founding Grand Masters had time to imprint upon the chapter something rarer than doctrine. They gave it identity before history could even properly know it existed. This is why Titan's hidden years matter so deeply to the Grey Knight's character. They were not flung half-formed into the galaxy's madness. They were tempered in secret, like a blade held in the forge, long after other weapons had already been drawn in haste. The Imperium that later encountered them would see only the finished edge, never the long years of unseen shaping in the chamber of storm and silence. When Titan at last returned, it did so into a galaxy already beginning to rearrange its military and political organs after the death of the Dream of Legions. The age of the Second Founding was dawning. The great hosts of the Old Order were being broken apart into chapters, recorded, classified, and set into the new skeletal architecture of survival. It was then, under the deepest veil of secrecy, that the Grey Knights were quietly inserted into Imperial record as the 666th chapter. The designation was no public honor. It was a cipher hidden within bureaucracy, a formal place in the new order granted to something that was never meant to be ordinary. Other chapters were known by heraldry, fealty, and public campaigns. The Grey Knights were known by almost no one, their designation buried in secrecy, their fortress inaccessible, their purpose restricted to the narrowest circles of sanctioned knowledge. Yet that quiet insertion mattered enormously, because it marked the passage from hidden project to enduring institution. The Emperor's final demon-forged contingency had become a permanent arm of the Imperium, though one cloaked so thoroughly that even its existence could be denied by those sworn to serve the throne. With Titan's return came another foundational act, no less important than the warding of the moon or the appointment of Janus. The lords of the Inquisition travelled to the fortress monastery, and there, in ancient secrecy, met with the first Supreme Grand Master. What passed in full between Janus and those high keepers of forbidden vigilance remains sealed in the oldest annals, but Imperial lore remembers it as the first secret pact between the Inquisition and the Grey Knights. That covenant would shape the hidden war for all the ages to come. The chapter would not be squandered in common campaigns. It would remain reserved for the blackest manifestations of chaos. Knowledge of its existence would be constricted with merciless care. The Inquisition, founded to prosecute mankind's invisible enemies, had found its argent sword, and Janus, First Lord of Titan, had accepted the burden of wielding that secrecy as ruthlessly as any nemesis blade. In that moment, the future character of the Grey Knights was fixed. They would not stand in triumphal parades. They would not be celebrated in the common memory of the Imperium. They would be summoned in whispers, deployed in catastrophe, and hidden again behind curtains of blood, oath, and sanctioned silence. Thus were they born from the ash of the heresy, not into glory, but into an eternal and secret war. There are fortress monasteries throughout the Imperium, and there are worlds that exist only to feed war. But Titan is neither thing in any ordinary sense. It is not merely the homeworld of a chapter, nor merely a citadel from which transhuman warriors launch campaigns against the enemies of mankind. Titan is a sealed moon, a preserve of dread purpose, orbiting within the cradle of the Sol system, hidden not by distance, but by silence, decree, and the immense gravitational weight of secrets too dangerous to be given common speech. Deep within that hidden fortress monastery on Saturn's moon, The Grey Knights dedicate themselves above all else to the eradication of demonkind, and everything about Titan reflects that singular vocation. It is a place where architecture is theology, where stone is made to hold litany and warding, where every corridor is as much a ritual instrument as it is a military artery. The moon itself bears the aura of a sanctified wound in reality, a place touched by Malcador's design, by the warp, and by an unending discipline of psychic vigilance. To speak of Titan as a base is to diminish it. Titan is a vault. Titan is a bastion. Titan is a blade sheath buried within the innermost flesh of the Imperium, and everything within it exists for contemplation, preparation, and annihilation. The citadel of Titan rises in the shadow of Mount Anarch like a jagged black accusation thrust up from the moon's ice sheets and seas of methane. It is carved of basalt, severe and sepulchral, less like a palace of heroes than a monumental tomb built for warriors who know they are fated to spend their lives in the company of blasphemy. Yet within that basalt mass, there is more than martial function. The citadel was not raised as a barracks or a proud bastion of public remembrance. It was wrought as a fortress monastery in the oldest and darkest sense of that term, a place where meditation and slaughter are forged into one discipline. Here prayer is not soft. Here study is not leisurely. Here silence is not peace, but concentration before judgment. The chambers of Titan are arranged for minds that must know the enemy as intimately as executioners know the weight of an axe, and yet remain uncorrupted by that knowledge. The Grey Knights do not dwell in a warrior kingdom fashioned for banners and glory. They inhabit a sanctum of exterminators, where contemplation exists only to sharpen the soul for the next impossible war. Nor is Titan a homeworld in the manner of those more visible chapters whose recruiting worlds, clan realms, and battle traditions become part of imperial legend. Titan is guarded as an inquisitorial preserve, bound to the Ordo Malleus, and held within a circle of secrecy so oppressive that even many space marines believe the Grey Knights to be no more than a myth. Its location, purpose, and internal life are denied to almost the whole of mankind. The chapter is permanently attached to the Ordo Malleus as its chamber militant, and this bond saturates the very atmosphere of the moon. Titan is not a place one visits by honor. It is not a world to which pilgrims ascend with hymns and banners. It is entered, if it is entered at all, under the sanction of powers that traffic in redaction, soul-scouring, and terminal silence. The consequence is that Titan feels less like a territory and more like a sealed jurisdiction of forbidden knowledge, where the ordinary distinctions between monastery, arsenal, archive, prison, reliquary, and tribunal have long since collapsed into one monolithic purpose. It belongs to the Grey Knights, but it is watched by the Inquisition, haunted by ancient obligations, and secured as though all the damned things of the galaxy might at any moment begin hammering from beneath its foundations. To walk the inner ways of the citadel in imagination is to pass through a succession of chambers that each reveal a fragment of the Grey Knight's true nature. There are armories where sanctified weapons and silvered warplate wait in ordered silence for the next translation into hell. There are halls of remembrance, penance and memorials, visible only to those few able to understand the names of campaigns that can never be openly commemorated. There are chapels where oaths are not recited as comfort, but hammered into the mind as psychic bulwarks against possession and temptation. There are training halls and trial chambers where aspirants are not merely tested for prowess, but exposed to ordeals meant to cleanse weakness from the spirit and teach the difference between fear and corruption. There is the Augurium, seat of foresight and dread anticipation, where those gifted with the sight hunt signs of demonic eruption across the void. There is the Hall of Champions and the Chamber of Heroes, places where memory becomes armor and lineage becomes burden. There is the Librarium Demonica, one of the most heavily guarded repositories in the Imperium, in which the lore of the warp is stored behind layers of adamantium, consecration, and sigillite enchantment, because knowledge itself is among the most lethal substances kept on Titan. And beneath, behind, and between all these named places lie vaults, sealed galleries, reliquaries, and chambers to which even rank and honor do not guarantee access. Titan is not only inhabited, it is stratified like a catechism of secrets. If any place within the citadel reveals the chapter's soul most clearly, it is the Chamber of Purity. Buried deep beneath the fortress, beneath basalt, ritual, and age, it links the visible monastery to the mysterious vaults sealed under the weight of Mount Anarch. It is here that the purifiers stand their unending watch, these most incorruptible of the incorruptible, tending to a labor that is less sentry duty than liturgical containment. The Chamber of Purity is not merely a holy room. It is a symbolic statement about the Grey Knights themselves. Everything they are converges there: vigilance, secrecy, psychic discipline, sanctity under pressure, and the refusal to permit even the smallest seepage of demonic contagion into the heart of the chapter. The chamber is said to be haunted by the ghosts of vanquished foes clawing at the walls of reality, and the purifiers endure those whispers not because they doubt them, but because they understand what lesser men never could. The warp never truly forgets, and victory over demons is not a clean severance, but a perpetual act of keeping shut what forever seeks to return. The old legends of Titan go deeper still, speaking of something ancient and powerful slumbering beneath the moon's surface, such that even the Chamber of Purity is likened in hidden texts to the capstone of a graven tomb. On Titan, incorruptibility is not a virtue that is praised and assumed, it is a siege state, maintained without cease. The Grey Knight's relationship with death is likewise written into Titan's hidden geography. Beneath the fortress proper lie the Dead Fields, a cool sepulchral domain where the fallen of the chapter are born, when their bodies can be recovered from war. These catacombs are not some incidental crypt, but a vast and ordered necropolis, chambered by centuries, marked with memorials, tended by ferrymen and sepulchral attendants, whose own service has become a severe rite apart. Here the glorious dead of Titan are laid in their final sanctity, their gene seed reclaimed, their flesh cleansed of the filth and taint of battle, their deeds set down in funerary record. Deep within these sacred catacombs lies the tomb of the Eight, resting place of the first founding Grand Masters, the primal lineage from whom the chapter's hidden nobility descends. Among the Grey Knights, there endures a severe reverence for this consecrated ending, and the old law makes plain that many would sooner be laid among their dead beneath Titan than endure the iron half-life of an armored sarcophagus. In another chapter, such a sentiment might seem morbid. On Titan, it is entirely fitting. These warriors do not seek to escape death by machinery if the Emperor grants them the cleaner honor of rest among their brothers. For a demon hunter, there is a profound holiness in being made still at last beneath warded stone. And then there is the mystery that hangs over Titan like an unspoken sentence awaiting its final utterance. Deep within the chambers of purity, in the chamber said to hold the tomb of Malcador, the sigillite himself, rests a simple wooden box sealed in gold. Within lies the ancient parchment known only as the Terminus Decree. Few relics in all the lore of the Imperium possess so much weight while revealing so little. It is said to contain the final secret of the chapter, a sanction so immense that it might save mankind in its darkest hour or bring the foundations of the Imperium crashing down. No chronicler outside the highest sealed traditions can say with certainty what those instructions command. No Brotherhood debates them in public council. No archivist of the lesser orders is permitted even the comfort of informed speculation. There is only the tradition, severe and absolute, that only a supreme Grand Master knows how to open that box, and only when all hope for the future of humanity seems lost. Few details could better capture the essential nature of Titan. Beneath its armories and libraries, beneath its halls and crypts and chambers of trial, there remains a deeper layer of purpose still withheld, even from many who serve there unto death. The citadel does not merely guard secrets, it is itself constructed around one. This is why Titan feels so immense in the imagination of the Imperium's hidden histories. Not because it sprawls in common grandeur, but because each known chamber implies 10 unknown ones, each named relic hints at a deeper vault. Each preserved tradition suggests another older still beneath it. Even the masters of the chapter do not stride through a fully exhausted map of their own inheritance. The mountain has sealed crypts. The chamber of purity opens onto mysteries below. The warp nexus at the heart of the fortress is itself a remnant of Malkador's design, built to shelter the moon within the warp and still sustaining Titan in a condition that is never wholly ordinary real space. Ancient books hint at buried evil. Purifiers stand watch over hauntings that may be symptom rather than cause. The libraries contain knowledge dangerous enough to ruin worlds, while the greatest of the chapter's own founding truths remain restricted to the Supreme Grand Master alone. This gives Titan its unique quality in the wider myth of Warhammer 40,000. It is not simply hidden from the galaxy, it is hidden in layers from itself, a fortress whose innermost meaning retreats further inward. The deeper one goes, as though secrecy there has become not just policy, but geology. And so one leaves the thought of Titan not with comfort, but with a harder question. If this moon is a tomb, a monastery, a reliquary, a prison, an arsenal, and a vault of forbidden truth all at once, then who is ever permitted to pass through its gates and remain alive within it? Who is judged worthy to tread the basalt halls, to kneel in its chapels, to endure its trials, to hear the whispers under Mount Anarch, and still emerge with mind and soul intact? The citadel of Titan is a hidden world, yes, but more than that, it is a machine for measuring purity at the highest possible cost. It is not enough to arrive there. One must survive it. And the measure of who survives begins not in the armory or the war council, but in the long, pitiless process by which Titan chooses those few who may one day call themselves Grey Knights. They begin far from Titan, long before the aspirant ever sees the black. Towers rising against that poisoned moon. They begin in the trackless dark between worlds, in prison holds and scholar cells, in tribal wastes, under hive smog and cathedral shadow, in the minds of boys who do not yet understand why nightmare follows them so faithfully. The hunters who seek them are called gatherers, veterans of the Grey Knights, whose great age or grievous wounds have closed the path of ordinary war to them, but not the greater labor of the chapter. They are not broken relics nor pensioned heroes. They are old blades turned toward a subtler purpose. Their bodies may no longer be cast into the furnace of direct demon war, with the same relentless fury as before, yet their minds remain keen enough to detect the spark that matters most. They move through the Imperium like ghosts, with authority beyond rank, scrutinizing the human tide for those rare souls in whom psychic potential burns bright, without immediately collapsing into weakness, corruption, or lunacy. They do not search only for talent. Talent is cheap in the wrong vessel. They search for the union of gift and endurance, for minds that bend but do not shatter, for boys who have stared into terror and not entirely looked away. Because the Grey Knights are not an ordinary chapter, no ordinary boundaries restrain their search. Other Adeptus Astartes recruit according to blood right, tribal pact, feudal claim, long tradition, or the hard inherited customs of their fortress worlds. The Grey Knights are denied none of the Imperium's sources of flesh and spirit. The seed worlds of other chapters are open to them. Forbidding penal worlds are open to them. Even the dreaded black ships, which harvest psychers by the uncounted multitudes and carry them in misery toward terror, are open to them. This alone tells much of the chapter's character. The Grey Knights do not look for noble pedigree. They do not trust surface virtue, pious accent, or inherited honor. They search where the Imperium hides its strongest, strangest, and most dangerous sons, because theirs is not a brotherhood made for clean war. An aspirant may be found among prison-born killers, among feral survivors from worlds barely restored to compliance, or shackled in the PSI-shielded blackness of a vessel filled with weeping witches and future sacrificial fuel. If the mind is powerful enough and the soul hard enough, the gatherers may mark him. If it is not, he is left to the ordinary cruelty of imperial fate. To be chosen is not to be saved. It is to be condemned to a harsher judgment. Many would call transportation to Titan a deliverance from the furnace of common human existence, but that is because they know nothing of what waits there. A boy taken by the gatherers has not escaped death. He has merely been selected for a slower and more exacting form of it. The journey ends not in welcome, but in the chamber of trials, the grim keep beside the greater bulk of the citadel, where the making and unmaking of grey nights begins. There the chosen are stripped of all assumption. No one is praised for being found. No one is comforted for having been taken from a hive pit, a war orphanage, a prison stockade, or a black ship cell. The chapter does not flatter potential. It assaults it. The candidate is brought to Titan only so that weakness may be exposed with total efficiency. Every moment from arrival onward is designed to answer one merciless question. Will he break? If the answer is yes, then Titan has no use for him. Thus, the first memory of Titan for many aspirants is not reverence, but cold. Shivering in the holds of antiquated shuttles, they are carried down through a sky that offers no welcome, only a hard, thin atmosphere that bites through flesh and breath alike. Some are brought directly within the precincts of the citadel. Many more are not afforded even that small mercy. They are released upon the desolate plain and ordered toward the distant fortress gates, those black towers hanging at the edge of sight like a sentence already passed. The air is freezing and inhospitable, the ground a wasteland that strips away every illusion that this moon is a sanctuary. It is a trial field. It is a proving ground. Here the logic of the Grey Knights is revealed in its naked severity. The march is not merely to measure endurance, it is to test obedience, conviction, and refusal to turn aside. Those who look upon the far towers and calculate instead for themselves, those who choose the wilds over the command given them, reveal the fatal flaw at once. Undisciplined independence, private judgment, the belief that one may evade the prescribed path and still remain worthy. Titan punishes this instantly. Those who turn away die in the wastes. Those who continue forward learn that the chapter values not merely strength, but directed strength, not merely survival, but the willingness to move toward commanded purpose without flinching. Yet reaching the gates is only the first stripping. Away. No triumphant rest follows, no fire-lit hall, no ceremony of welcome, no long breath taken beneath shelter. The candidate is sent out again, forced from one ordeal into another with the cruel swiftness that defines all Grey Knight training. He is driven across 1,000 kilometers of death zones toward the shimmering tundra of caustic crystals and chemical haze known as the Xanadu region. The very naming of that place carries the flavor of a hidden curse within the chapter's lore. To reach it, the aspirant must cross the Anarch High Pass, where even a whispered word can loose an avalanche of choking dust. He must endure the rusting desert, where dead void ships rot beneath the sky and insane servitors roam among the wreckage like machine revenants. He must navigate the Saturnine maze, a relic of old war still seeded with nightmares and the remnants of ancient violence. And all the while, he must maintain control of immature psychic power under intolerable stress, for the chapter does not forgive psychic failure as an accident. The law speaks of inhibitor collars keyed to detonate should an aspirant lose control. Even before he reaches true implantation and formal training, the candidate learns the fundamental law of the Grey Knights. Psychic ability without mastery is not a gift, it is a liability to be destroyed. Xanadu itself is the true hinge upon which the early trials turn. To breathe its vapors is to feel the mind begin to slide out from beneath itself. Alien thoughts intrude. Nightmare visions crawl across perception. Reality loses its edges, and the self is tempted toward dissolution. This is not incidental hardship. It is a crafted assault on identity. The chapter wants the candidate there precisely because the place attacks more than muscle and nerve. It attacks inwardness. A boy may have run across ice and dust through obedience alone, but obedience is not enough in Xanadu. There he must maintain command of his own mind, while the moon whispers him into unraveling. All around him lie the bones of those who failed, thousands of headless skeletons scattered across the landscape like scripture written in corpse matter. Few return, fewer still return unchanged. The candidate is meant to understand that his own thoughts can betray him, that perception can be corrupted, that fear can arrive not as panic, but as suggestion, seduction, exhaustion, and half-welcomed surrender. This is why the Grey Knights break their recruits down before they rebuild them. A fortress erected upon untested foundations will not stand when the warp leans against it. Better to shatter the raw material under controlled torment than permit hidden cracks to remain and widen later in demon war. Everything about this process reveals the chapter's central creed. Psychic gift alone is worthless. The Imperium contains no shortage of psychers. It burns them by the million, chains them in holds, drains them into ritual machinery, and trains a tiny remnant into sanctioned service. The warp touches many, the warp destroys most. What the Grey Knights require is not simply a mind able to perceive or channel immaterial power, but a soul capable of ruling that power without bargaining with it, worshipping it, fearing it, or mistaking its presence for destiny. Strength of will, purity of purpose, hatred of corruption, and the ability to endure sustained mental violation without losing the self. These matter more than raw talent. A recruit who can summon force but cannot master dread is useless. A recruit who can see farther into the veil but secretly yearns for what he sees is worse than useless. Thus, Grey Knight training is not noble pageantry in polished halls. It is not a romantic ascent into knightly station. It is an industrial sacrament of elimination, a machine built to locate weakness and grind it to dust. Those who survive the early trials have not proven themselves worthy in any sentimental sense. They have merely demonstrated that the chapter may begin the deeper and more invasive work. After the wastes and vapors come the longer torments, the tests below the surface, the pain disciplines, the surgeries, the psycho-conditioning, the ritual humiliations and sacrificial severances through which the old self is erased. The surviving aspirant passes through the caverns beneath Ganesa Macula and the icy dark of Eos Antor. He endures ordeals of body and mind until at last he is inducted as a neophyte and his true making begins. The most advanced bioengineering and psychosurgery available in the Imperium are turned upon him. He is conditioned, implanted, warded, and forced through the 666 rituals of detestation, each one another hammer blow against memory, fear, pride, and residual humanity. His prior identity is stripped away through mind wipe, not as cruelty for its own sake, but because the Grey Knights permit demons as little purchase as possible. Old loves, old names, private shames, childhood griefs, secret resentments, these are all doors through which the warp may whisper, so the chapter closes them. What remains at the end is no longer merely a gifted child dragged from some far province of the Imperium. It is the beginning of a battle brother of Titan, rebuilt from torment into purpose, his psychic power no longer a dangerous accident, but a sanctified weapon, his flesh and mind trained toward one impossible office. He stands then at the threshold of the chapter's defining miracle, and its most terrible expectation, that he shall possess not only strength, not only power, but that rare and unnatural thing for which the Grey Knights are feared and revered above all others, an uncommon purity. There is a paradox at the heart of the Grey Knights so severe that lesser minds would call it blasphemy if they understood it at all. They wage war upon the warp by reaching into that same abyss and forcing its impossible energies into shapes of discipline, sanction, and annihilation. They do not stand apart from the psychic storm as untouched observers, nor do they pretend that the Imperium can be defeated by steel alone. Each Grey Knight is a psyker, and that fact defines the chapter more surely than heraldry, fortress, or lineage. Where other warriors of the Imperium recoil from the thought of touching the great ocean except under necessity, the sons of Titan are taught from the first that their battlefield is as much unseen as visible, that the demon must be resisted in thought before it is banished in flesh, and that the mind can be honed into as precise and murderous an instrument as any nemesis blade. Theirs is not a war of simple opposition. It is a war of mastery, of taking the same empiric medium from which corruption rises and making of it a weapon that answers only to will, creed, and exacting control. Yet the defining myth of the Grey Knights is not that they are mighty. The Imperium has no shortage of mighty things. It has titans that shake continents, battle fleets that eclipse suns, space marines who can split open bunkers with their bare hands, and saints whose names are spoken in tears and gunsmoke. Strength alone is common coin in the age of endless war. What sets the Grey Knights apart in the sealed annals of demon war is incorruptibility. Again and again the lore returns to this same impossible note, hammered into memory like a litany against despair. In 10,000 standard years of imperial history, with all the temptations, torments, betrayals, and apocalyptic sieges that span those ages, no Grey Knight is said to have turned from the Emperor and given himself to chaos. That statement is so stark that it borders on the unbelievable, and for that reason it has become central to the chapter's legend. It is not merely that they survive contact with the warp more often than others. It is that they are remembered as having withstood what ought by all rights to have consumed at least some of them. Where other institutions of the Imperium preserve hope by pretending corruption is rare, the Grey Knights inspire dread precisely because their record is held to be without such stain. The traditional explanation for this unnatural resistance begins in their blood and ascends into something close to theology. The Grey Knights possess no primarch, whose memory they publicly inherit, no gene line rooted in one of the familiar 20 sons of the Emperor. Instead, the oldest traditions of Titan hold that their gene seed was fashioned from the genome of the Emperor himself, a unique legacy sometimes named the Emperor's gift. It is this origin that many believe accounts for the chapter's uncommon purity, as though each battle brother carries within him not simply the transhuman potency of an Astartes creation, but a more absolute and terrible imprint of the master of mankind's own incorruptible design. The lore offers that claim not as idle boasting, but as a recurring answer to a question that would otherwise have none. How does a full chapter of psychers hunt demons at intimate range and remain unclaimed? One answer, repeated in venerable records, is that the Emperor built into them a resistance unlike any other found in the Imperium. Another, more austere and perhaps more truthful, is that the gift alone is not enough, and that what is granted in seed must be reaffirmed every day in thought, ritual, and unbending conduct. The Grey Knights themselves would likely find comfort in neither explanation, for both come with burden rather than privilege. That burden is why every Grey Knight is trained to become a weapon of the mind, no less than of the blade. In most chapters, psychic mastery is concentrated in the Librarius, a specialized office whose members stand slightly apart from the rank and file. On Titan, there is no such ordinary separation, for the psychic nature of the chapter is universal. The lowliest battle brother is not merely permitted to wield force of the mind. He is expected to do so in ordered union with every other element of his warcraft. The bolter is sanctified. The nemesis weapon is psychically attuned. The armor itself is inscribed, anointed, and ritually charged to work in concert with the bearer's will. Even the body is marked beneath the skin with hexagrammic and pentagrammic purity wards, silvered protections intended to hinder demonic touch and contamination. Thus, a Grey Knight enters battle as a layered act of psychic fortification. His flesh, wargear, training, and liturgical discipline are all bent toward the same end, and he must learn to maintain those layers under pressures that would turn an ordinary psyker into a howling gate of possession. This relentless internal discipline is married to an equally relentless obsession with esoteric anti-demonic lore. The Grey Knights do not simply hate demons. They study them with the pitiless concentration of executioners, memorizing the anatomy of every condemned beast they will ever face. Wards are not decoration to them, but battlefield geometry. Banishments are not theatrical recitations, but precision weapons, spoken with the same grim practicality with which another warrior might chamber a round. There are words of banishment known only to the chapter, secret utterances whose eye-searing symmetry would shatter weaker minds, and these are woven into prayers, rites of exorcism, and the cadence of battle itself. Alongside them lies the most dangerous knowledge of all, the search for the true names of demons. To know a demon's true name is to gain leverage over its being, to bind, weaken, or cast it back into the warp through the exact pronunciation of what it most truly is. The Grey Knights maintain entire hidden systems of scribes, librarians, and prognosticars to hunt this mutable lore across the tides of the Imperium, because in the hidden war, a true name can strike as surely as any halberd blow, their own. Names are chosen in deliberate opposition to such infernal truths, made into counters and wounds against the creatures they are sworn to destroy. Nothing could reveal the chapter more clearly than this. Even identity is weaponized on Titan. It is crucial to understand, however, that none of this resembles the uncontrolled sorcery that the Imperium rightly fears. The Grey Knights do not surrender themselves to inspiration, bargain with whispers from beyond the veil, or mistake raw psychic potency for wisdom. Their mastery is doctrinal, layered, ritualized, and constantly supervised by tradition older than most imperial worlds. They channel mental energies into protective wards and battle spells with severe precision, not flamboyant abandon. Their power is bounded by catechism, by the disciplines of the chapter, by the inherited methods of Titan, and by an entire fortress culture designed to strip the self of vanity and private impulse. This is the great distinction between a Grey Knight and the countless other psykers who flicker through the Imperium's vast body like diseased sparks. The ordinary Imperial psyker is dangerous first and useful second. Even when sanctioned, he remains vulnerable to terror, excess, pride, hidden longing, and the sheer corruptive pressure of the warp. The Grey Knight is shaped so that every instinct opposes such drift. He does not cast from appetite. He invokes from command. He does not open himself to the immaterium. He thrusts his will into it like a mailed fist and demands obedience for one precise and sanctified purpose. For that reason, purity among the Grey Knights must never be mistaken for gentleness. It is not soft holiness. It is not the innocent radiance beloved of shrine painters and civilian sermons. It is a hard thing, almost inhuman in its severity. To be pure on Titan is to maintain such merciless internal control that fear, ambition, grief, temptation, and curiosity are all mastered before they can even begin to blossom into weakness. It is to endure the unending proximity of forbidden knowledge without becoming fascinated by it. It is to hear the names of demons and remain colder than the stone walls that imprison those names in script and blood. It is to kill not only the enemy without, but every treacherous impulse within that might one day answer the enemy's call. Such purity is exhausting, punitive, and absolute. It requires ritual after ritual, prayer after prayer, ward upon ward, memory scrub, and identity forging, because the Grey Knights do not trust their own greatness. They trust only the disciplines that keep greatness from turning rancid. If they are incorruptible, it is not because corruption is absent around them. It is because they live as men under siege from it at every hour of their existence. And so the chapter's reputation for uncommon purity becomes more than a legend. It becomes an organizing principle for everything they are. A brotherhood composed entirely of psychers cannot be structured like a conventional force and survive its own burden. A warrior order tasked with resisting damnation at intimate range cannot rely upon loose sentiment or improvised hierarchy. The Grey Knights must distribute duty according to spiritual resilience as much as battlefield role. They must appoint watchers, keepers of law, masters of prophecy, guardians of sanctity, and exemplars whose purity is tested against relics and horrors too dangerous for ordinary battle brothers to bear.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Their inner incorruptibility therefore demands an outer architecture equal to it, a system of brotherhoods, offices, sacred burdens, and hidden orders by which the immense strain of demon war can be carried without fracture. If purity is the soul of the Grey Knights, then organization is the armature that permits that soul to endure. And it is to that severe and unusual structure that the gaze must now turn. The Grey Knights are, in the most technical and insufficient sense, Adeptus Astartes. Their flesh is transhuman, their wars are fought in ceramite and blood, and their brotherhood descends from the same great post-human project that birthed the other chapters of the Imperium. Yet to imagine them arranged like a common codex force is to misunderstand the nature of their existence. They do not follow the tenets of the Codex Astartes in matters of organization. Their structure was shaped instead by traditions they hold to have descended from Malcador, and by the brutal requirements of a war that Robert Guilliman's battlefield logic could not fully contain. Demon war does not permit clean territorial company doctrine, nor predictable theaters, nor the old certainties of line, reserve, and reinforcement. Warp breach, possession, hidden cult activity, sudden incursion and ritual catastrophe demand a brotherhood that can be broken into small, exacting, long-trained kill teams and cast across the Imperium with minimal warning. That is why the Grey Knights are spread in hidden strength across the stars, and why their internal order is built not for parade ground symmetry, but for secrecy, psychic burden, and immediate sanctioned violence against unreality. The true skeleton of the chapter is the Brotherhood system. These are the great internal organs of Titan, roughly comparable in broad strength to a battle company, yet burdened with identities and special obligations, unlike those of ordinary space marines. Each brotherhood is led in battle by a brother captain and stands beneath the authority of a Grand Master, while the whole chapter is ruled by the council of 8 Grand Masters under the Supreme Grand Master. This alone gives the Grey Knights a different spiritual posture from most chapters. They are not merely split into tactical bodies. Each brotherhood carries a function, a temperament, and in many cases a custodial burden tied to the chapter's hidden life. Their names are not casual embellishment. They are statements of doctrine. The first are the sword bearers, the second the blades of victory, the third the ward makers, the fourth the prescient brethren, and so onward through the rest of the chapter's secret order of battle. Each is a war host, yes, but also a chamber of inheritance, carrying a distinct share of Titan's endless labor against the demonic. Among these, the third brotherhood has long held a place of peculiar honor. Tradition remembers it as the Brotherhood of Janus, first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, and whether one takes that memory as literal continuity or sanctified legend, the effect within the chapter is the same. The third stands in the long afterglow of the founding Lord, and throughout the millennia it has fostered many of Titan's most renowned names. Kaldor Drago is counted among its greatest sons, and in the later ages, its command has passed through figures such as Grandmaster Aldrich Voldus and Brother Captain Arvan Stern. This is not accidental. The third is bound to the Librarius, and its Grand Master bears the title Warden of the Librarius, with authority over the Librarium Demonica and the chapter's librarians. It is therefore a line of unusual prestige and terrible scholarship, a brotherhood where battle renown and forbidden knowledge meet beneath the same grim standard. The legends attached to it are not the bright and boastful kind favored by lesser warrior orders. They are honors earned in the keeping of dangerous law, in the mastery of banishment, and in the slaughter of entities whose names would crack mortal reason. If the third brotherhood is a line of warding and learned wrath, then the fourth brotherhood is the chapter's listening nerve extended into the dark. It is known as the Prescient Brethren, and its Grand Master is the keeper of the Augurium. Within it serve a concentration of prognosticars, those highly specialized Grey Knights whose psychic sensitivity is turned toward detecting fluctuations in the Imperium and reading the tremors that presage demonic incursion. In another chapter, such men might seem almost cloistered, half withdrawn from war into the chamber of visions. On Titan, the opposite is true. Foresight is war. To know where the veil will rend, where the ritual will flower into manifestation, where the blood price is about to be paid in full, is to save worlds before the first scream. The fourth brotherhood therefore stands as a prescient order within a chapter already composed of psychers, a line of seers whose role proves that the Grey Knights do not fight only with blades and bolters, but with anticipation, augury, and relentless vigilance against the first stirrings of the warp. Above and within these brotherhoods stand the great officers of Titan, and their offices are never merely administrative. A Grand Master is not simply a battlefield commander. He is an unmatched demon slayer, a powerful psyker, a member of the chapter's ruling council, and often the keeper of some specific and ancient domain of the chapter's hidden life, whether armory, fleet, sanctum, librarius, or augurium. The brother captains beneath them bear a burden scarcely lighter. They command their brotherhoods directly and, in matters of strategy and planning, are trusted with extraordinary independence, for demon war punishes hesitation and rewards only exact command. These are not ornamental titles in a noble hierarchy. They are ranks of custodianship. A Grey Knight's commander must know not only how to destroy the foe, but what may and may not be named, what relics may be drawn, what rituals are permissible, what truths must remain sealed, and when an entire world must be judged beyond redemption. Command on Titan is therefore inseparable from esoteric doctrine. The higher one rises, the more one becomes not only a lord of war, but a warden of dangerous knowledge. Yet even among such men there exist orders apart. The Purifiers are the most severe example. They are distanced from the 8 brotherhoods by nature and tradition, and are chosen only from those Grey Knights whose souls are judged utterly incorruptible, even by the chapter's already merciless standards. They are the epitome of sanctity on Titan, not in the soft language of shrine sermons, but in the grim sense that they can be trusted to stand nearest to spiritual contamination without wavering. There are seldom many of them. There could not be. Their existence is itself a commentary on how high the Grey Knights set the bar of purity, and how much higher still they reserve for those who will bear the chapter's most spiritually dangerous burdens. At the head of this order stands the Castellan, and in later centuries, Garin Crow would become its defining exemplar, bearing both command of the Purifier Order and the torment of warding the Blade of Antwyr. In the Purifiers, the chapter's myth of incorruptibility finds its sharpest edge. They are the chosen few among the incorruptible, a paradox made flesh and sent to war. If the Purifiers are the spiritual heart of the chapter, then the Paladins are its martial crown. They stand as warriors without peer, an elite order whose members are drawn from the most skilled and proven Grey Knights, and elevated only after they have established not just prowess, but character and cause through perilous tests. Once raised to that station, a Paladin is bound not only to the chapter in general, but to one of its Grand Masters in particular, serving as personal bodyguard, champion, and advisor. Thus, the Paladins are not simply elite terminators in brighter reputation. They are living extensions of high command, embodiments of martial trust, and shock troops reserved for the thickest fighting and the gravest peril. The oldest accounts rightly call them the chapter's martial champions. That phrase matters because it reveals their symbolic role. Where the Purifiers embody the Grey Knight's sanctity, the Paladins embody perfected warcraft under absolute discipline. They are the mailed ideal of Titans set loose upon the enemy. Holding all of this together are the specialist orders and offices that form the chapter's psychic, prophetic, and spiritual spine. Librarians among the Grey Knights are not anomalies, but intensified expressions of what the whole Brotherhood already is. Warriors whose psychic arts are stronger still, and who sustain battle brethren with powers of warding, summoning, banishment, and force. Prognosticars read the hidden tremors of the warp, detecting where demonic incursions will erupt, and tracing the shifting meanings of the words of banishment and the true names of demons. Chaplains, rare and precious on Titan, minister to the spiritual health of warriors whose burden is more terrible than that of any common chapter, and the ancient tradition holds that their watchfulness has helped preserve the Grey Knights from the corruption that has ruined so many other servants of the Imperium. This is what makes the chapter unlike any other. Its hierarchy is not merely a chain of rank. It is an ecosystem of psychic vigilance, prophetic interpretation, doctrinal enforcement, and sacred violence, all built to ensure that no part of the hidden war is fought by brute force alone. And once one understands this, the next truth follows with iron inevitability. A chapter built for such a war cannot arm itself like any other. Its structure leads naturally to its arsenal. If Grand Masters are wardens of vaults, if Brotherhoods are specialized organs of demon war, if Purifiers and Paladins carry burdens beyond the common line, then the weapons they bear cannot be mere variations on familiar Space Marine steel. They must be sanctified instruments of psychic slaughter, blades and bolters made for a battlefield where prayer, will, and geometry matter as much as caliber and impact. The hierarchy of Titan therefore points toward the armory as surely as a blade points toward the throat. To understand how the Grey Knights are organized is to stand at the threshold of the next revelation, the Wargear fashioned for a war against unreality itself. Grey Knight Wargear is not merely advanced in the way that the Adeptus Astartes understand advancement. It is not simply stronger ceramite, finer machine spirits, purer adamantium, or more precise artisan work from the sealed forges of Titan. It is sanctified from inception for a single and accursed purpose. Every plate, every round, every blade, every suit seal and psychic circuit exists not only to wage war upon flesh and armor, but to prosecute judgment against entities that mock flesh, spit upon matter, and inhabit reality only as a temporary insult. The weapons of the Grey Knights are therefore not instruments of conquest in the ordinary sense. They are anti-demonic devices disguised as the panoply of transhuman knights. Their armor is prayer hammered into metal. Their bolters are consecrated execution, rites given mechanical form. Their blades are designed not just to pierce a body, but to break the false cohesion by which the warp pretends it can wear one. This is why a Grey Knight entering battle does not resemble a conventional space marine striding to war. He resembles a ward made incarnate, a mobile prohibition cast in argent and black, one more seal driven into the face of hell. Nothing expresses that identity more clearly than the Nemesis force weapon. Among the Grey Knights, It is more than a preferred armament. It is the badge of their office as killers of the unreal. Other Space Marines may bear relic swords, thunder hammers, axes of office, claws, spears, and heirloom blades rich with heraldic memory. The Grey Knights carry nemesis weapons because demon war demands a closer and more intimate lethality. These are not merely force weapons in the broad and familiar sense. They are psychic conductors attuned to the exacting disciplines of Titan, their blades, hafts, and cores, bound to the will of the bearer so that thought, soul, and killing stroke converge in one sanctioned act. Whether wrought as sword, halberd, falchion, stave, or demon hammer, the nemesis weapon is an extension of Grey Knight doctrine itself. It is the physical confession that in this chapter, mind and steel can never be separated. To strike with a nemesis blade is to do more than wound. It is to impose banishment by force of sanctified intent, to smash the unstable architecture of a demon's manifested lie, to cast a verdict through metal and psychic pressure in the same instant. It is, in the hands of a true son of Titan, one of the purest symbols of the Grey Knight's lethal identity. Yet even the nemesis weapon does not stand alone, because the Grey Knights are protected and empowered by that unseen lattice of warding known as the Aegis. To mistake the Aegis for armor plating, however blessed, is to miss the true terror of Grey Knight warfare. The Aegis is more than shell and seal. It is a psychic defense architecture woven through warplate, sigil, ritual, discipline, and the trained will of the warrior himself. The silver armor of the chapter is covered in engraved hexagrammic and pentagrammic protections, inscribed scripture, sanctified alloys and hidden channels through which the Battle Brothers' own psychic force can circulate in disciplined pattern. Thus, the armor is not passive. It is awakened by the mind of the wearer, strengthened by his focus, and rendered into an active ward against possession, corruption, and empiric violation. The demon does not merely see metal when it looks upon a Grey Knight. It feels resistance radiating from every plate junction and ward line, every oath burned into the armor's memory, every layer of contempt the bearer has been taught to hold within himself. The true horror for the enemy comes when several Grey Knights stand together, for then the Aegis ceases to be only an individual defense and becomes something like a choir of hatred and purity, each warrior's psychic discipline locking against that of his brothers until the whole squad forms a field of spiritual pressure that gnaws at the manifested demon simply by existing nearby. This is one of the reasons Grey Knights are so unnerving to behold in battle. They do not rage as berserkers rage. They do not howl victory cant as crusading chapters might. They enter the breach with a synchronized severity that feels almost liturgical. Their presence thickens the air. Demonic forms begin to writhe and destabilize before the first blade even falls. The impure feel their thoughts grow sluggish, their blasphemies catch in their throats, their confidence stripped away by an advancing wall of psyches trained to despise them with utter exactitude. The Grey Knights do not merely engage demons, they suppress them through proximity. Their collective purity becomes a weapon, their ordered souls an environmental hazard to the warpborn. This is why the silence of Grey Knight warfare is so often remarked upon by the few who survive long enough to remember it. There is bolter thunder, certainly. There is the shriek of sundered flesh, the howl of the banished, the crack of force fields, and the hiss of ruptured reality. Yet from the Grey Knights themselves, there is often far less noise than one might expect from such violence. They coordinate with a wordless discipline that borders upon the inhuman. Their communication runs through drilled instinct, psychic rapport, shared doctrine, and the cold certainty of purpose. Under the shroud of the Aegis, amid nullifying wards and the suppression of empiric interference, the usual cacophony of battle seems strangely muted around them. It is as though the chapter brings its own atmosphere to war, a hush of concentrated extermination beneath which demons falter and mortal witnesses feel an instinctive urge to kneel or flee. Ordinary Astartes assaults are terrifying in their volume and speed. A Grey Knight's assault is terrifying because it feels like the deliberate closing of a trap. That trap is very often sprung by teleport assault. For the Grey Knights do not favor the slow and visible approach if a warp breach can be cut at its throat by instantaneous violence. Their war is against rituals, gates, summoning circles, sacrificial nexuses, and rapidly collapsing windows of containment. To fight such battles by conventional maneuver would be to grant the enemy time, and time is the one indulgence demon war cannot spare. Thus the sons of Titan often descend by teleportarium strike, appearing in the black heart of the catastrophe rather than battering at its outer skin. They materialize amid ash circles, in cathedral naves gone red with possession, at the center of hive spires where cult magi are still voicing the last syllables of invocation. Theirs is not a strategy of gradual pressure. It is precision decapitation. Find the breach, locate the summoner, destroy the anchor, banish the manifested horror, seal the wound. Such warfare demands a fearlessness and exactitude that few others in the Imperium could sustain, but for the Grey Knights, it is merely standard practice. They do not wish to own the battlefield. They wish to kill the precise point at which reality is failing. Among the formations best suited to this kind of sudden violence are the interceptor squads, whose personal teleporters make them among the most mobile and unnerving warriors in the entire chapter. These devices permit short-range translation through the edges of warp space, allowing the interceptors to shunt across the field in blinks of blue-white force, traversing distances that would take other troops minutes or hours to cross under fire. In Demon War, this is invaluable. A cult cell that believes itself protected behind a ring of flesh sacrifices can find silver-armored executioners suddenly among them. A sorcerer retreating behind bodyguards and unstable wards can be caught before the next word of his litany is spoken. A breach thought contained at one end of a battlefield can erupt anew elsewhere, only for interceptors to flash into being beside it before the defenders even understand what they are seeing. Their role is not merely speed for its own sake, it is the denial of sanctuary. Against the Grey Knights, there is nowhere near enough distance to be safe. Where speed and suddenness are essential, weight of fire is no less critical, and here the purgation squads reveal another aspect of the chapter's distinct battlefield philosophy. In most Imperial doctrine, heavy support lags a little behind the spear point, establishes lanes of suppression, and saturates the field from relative security. The Grey Knights cannot always afford that pattern. They prosecute warfare in spaces where the line between breach and annihilation may be measured in seconds. Their purgation squads therefore advance with the assault, rather than merely supporting it from afar, bringing psy-cannons, incinerators, Gatling silencers, and other specialist weapons directly into the most blighted zones of combat. They do not simply pin the foe, they scour it, saturating demon flesh and corrupted matter with a level of controlled destructive force designed to overwhelm the enemy's ability to cohere. There is something deeply characteristic in that method. The Grey Knights do not separate cleansing from assault. They advance as they burn. It is also no accident that Terminator armor occupies such a central place in Grey Knight identity. In many chapters, tactical dreadnought armor is a rare and storied panoply reserved for a revered elite, deployed only in those most critical of circumstances. Among the Grey Knights, it is far more fundamental than that, because the conditions under which they fight so often demand the heaviest possible protection, the strongest wards, and the most direct insertion into the nightmare core of battle. Grey Knight. Terminators are not a ceremonial afterthought. They are one of the chapter's natural battlefield expressions. Their bulk, protection, and teleport capability make them ideal for descending directly into demonic concentrations, where ordinary armor would be flayed open in moments by claws of impossible substance and sorcery-made blade. When one imagines the classic image of the Grey Knights, silver giant, stormbolter braced, nemesis halberd raised, walking through warp fire untouched, one is very often imagining a Terminator. This matters because it shows the Grey Knights at their truest. They are not lightly equipped raiders dancing at the margins of hell. They are mailed executioners who step into its maw and keep walking. And then, at the far edge of even Grey Knight excess, there is the Nemesis Dread Knight. This exoskeletal war machine exists because the chapter is honest about the scale of the foes it must face. Greater demons are not simply bigger adversaries. They are catastrophic presences, spiritual artillery pieces wrapped in titanic bodies, warlords of the warp whose mere existence can unravel formations and drown worlds in terror. To confront such a thing at close quarters requires more than valor, more than armor, more even than Terminator plate and a blessed blade. It requires a machine built so that one Grey Knight may meet a towering demon on near equal footing and survive long enough to destroy it. The Dread Knight is therefore not a crude brute engine, but an anti-monstrosity frame, its pilot suspended within a towering suit that amplifies strength, speed, resilience, and psychic lethality to grotesque levels. Armed with outsized nemesis weapons and heavy anti-demonic armament, it turns a single Grey Knight into a walking act of defiance against creatures that should by all sane measure be fought only by armies. That such machines exist at all tells the whole story. The Grey Knights do not design wargear for ordinary war and hope it will suffice in a demonic crisis. They build for unreality from the beginning, and in doing so reveal once more the cold truth of what they are. Not heroes in the public and glorious sense, but a hidden order whose every weapon is a refusal, whose every blade is a sentence, and whose every suit of silver armor is a warding rune made terrible and alive. The Grey Knights do not merely fight chaos, they suppress knowledge of chaos, and that duty is so essential to their existence that it is almost impossible to separate their wars from the silence that follows them. To understand the chapter properly is to grasp that every daemon slain, every cult burned out, every warp breach sealed is only half the labor. The second half begins when the battlefield is won. The Imperium is not held together by truth. It is held together by dogma, fear, habit, distance, and the carefully managed ignorance of uncounted billions. Were the full reality of the warp made plain to common men, to most governors, to most soldiers, to most priests, then despair, fascination, and corruption would spread faster than any plague. Thus, the Grey Knights are not simply executioners of the immaterial foe. They are custodians of a secret deemed too ruinous for ordinary minds. They arrive where reality has begun to fail, where the air itself is no longer trustworthy, where walls sweat blood and shadows answer prayer with laughter, and they leave behind not only corpses and ash, but absences, redactions, erased names, and memories cut from the minds of the living. Their war is hidden because the enemy is hidden, and because the knowledge of that enemy is itself a vector of infection. That is why Grey Knights campaigns so often unfold in places already halfway to damnation. Their battlefields are not always the grand visible fronts of ordinary imperial war. They are shrine vaults where sacred icons have begun to weep filth and speak in forbidden tongues. They are manufactoria whose assembly chants have twisted into invocation. They are underhives where the walls pulse with stolen heartbeats and the sump fog carries whispers from beyond the veil. They are void ships whose crews have gone silent while impossible geometries bloom behind sealed bulkheads. In such places, the material and immaterial do not merely collide, they bleed into one another. Gravity weakens, time loses discipline. Men hear the voices of the dead in their helm receivers. Statues turn their heads. Wounds open in space itself, and things without stable flesh begin to force themselves through. Here, the Grey Knights prosecute the mission pattern that has defined them since the hidden age of their founding. First, the breach is identified, whether through augury, astropathic distress, inquisitorial investigation, or the dark arithmetic of prophetic dread. Then, the strike force translates directly into the infected core. Summoners are cut down, cult circles shattered, rogue psychers annihilated before the rite can complete. The demon, once fully present, is met with sanctified bolter fire, nemesis force, true names, wards, and banishment. Then the wound in reality is sealed, if it still can be sealed. All else is secondary. The Grey Knights do not come to save appearances, they come to stop apocalypse at its spiritual source. This is why cultists, heretics, rogue psychers, and demonic heralds, though fearsome in their own right, are never the ultimate object of Grey Knight hatred. They matter because they are the scaffolding of manifestation, the mortal rot around the true ulcer. A cult may spill oceans of blood, but it does so to call forth something worse. A sorcerer may unmake regiments, but he is still only a mouthpiece for a deeper appetite. Even the heralds of the ruinous powers, resplendent and monstrous in their blasphemous authority, are not the end point of the chapter's mission. They are gatekeepers, outriders, embassies of the abyss. The Grey Knights kill them without hesitation, but always in service to the larger purpose. Reach the anchor, break the rite, name the demon, shatter the vessel, banish the invader, seal the scar. This pitiless prioritization is part of what makes the chapter seem so cold to those rare Imperial servants who survive long enough to observe it. The Grey Knights are not callous because they fail to value human life. They are callous because in demon war there is no room for sentimental distraction. To waste strength on anything but the black heart of the manifestation is to grant the warp another breath, and one breath is often enough to doom a world. Few in the Imperium know more of chaos than the Grey Knights, and fewer still pay so terrible a price for that knowledge. They study the foe with the kind of austere intimacy that would damn lesser men within days. They preserve words of banishment, hidden litanies, sigils of warding, infernal lineages, and the true names of demons. They know that the enemy is not random madness, but a kingdom of layered malice, hierarchy, appetite, and recurring pattern. They know the difference between infestation and manifestation, between possession and puppetry, between the ritual signs of one ruinous power and another. They know what draws the warp thin, what rites invite it, what emotions feed it, what symbols strengthen it, and what names can wound it. This knowledge makes them devastating. It also makes them dangerous to behold. The Imperium survives in part by refusing to look too closely into the abyss. The Grey Knights survive by looking into it constantly and never blinking. That alone explains why their secrecy is maintained with such monstrous severity. An order that knows so much of chaos cannot be allowed to become common speech. Nor can those who witness too much of its work always be permitted to carry that memory onward into the wider body of mankind. So comes the brutal cost of secrecy. It is one of the ugliest truths in the Grey Knights' history, and one that no honest telling of the chapter can evade. Unauthorized knowledge of the chapter or of the demonic manifestations they oppose may be answered by telepathic scouring, by execution, or in the direst cases, by the destruction of whole populations and worlds. Space Marines who have fought beside the Grey Knights have, in some traditions, been mind-wiped or psychically cleansed so that the memory of what they saw is cut away before it can spread. Guardsmen are less often granted even that harsh mercy. Common soldiers, civilian survivors, labor levies, militia remnants, refugees and planetary witnesses have too often found that surviving the first purge only delivers them into the second. If a world is judged irredeemably tainted, if the line between witness and contamination can no longer be trusted, then extermination may follow salvation with scarcely a pause between the two. This is not noble. It is not clean. It is the black arithmetic of an empire that believes ignorance is safer than truth, and the Grey Knights stand near the blade edge of that belief. They save worlds, yes, but often only by deciding which part of the world may continue to exist afterward. There are distinctions even within that cruelty. Space Marines, by virtue of their transhuman conditioning, their indoctrination, and their greater strategic value, have sometimes been judged suitable for telepathic cleansing rather than immediate death. Imperial Guard regiments, by contrast, have historically been far less likely to be spared knowledge of the Grey Knights or of the demonic truths they encountered. Flesh and blood men break too easily, spread rumor too quickly, and carry fear back into the great population mass of the Imperium, where fear can become cult, and cult can become breach. Yet even this system of pitiless containment has not always held. The most famous rupture came in the aftermath of Armageddon, when the Space Wolves refused to accept the indiscriminate purges demanded by the Ordo Malleus and the hidden machinery around the Grey Knights. Through that bitter and shameful conflict, remembered in later lore as the Months of Shame, the sons of Fenris came to know that the Grey Knights were no myth. The exception matters because it proves the rule. To learn of the chapter by surviving one of its campaigns is itself a historical anomaly, and it required one of the most stubborn and formidable chapters in the Imperium to wrench that knowledge into the light at all. Here lies the moral tension that makes the Grey Knights so compelling in the deeper darkness of the setting. They are saviors, and they are often the only saviors possible. Without them, demonic incursions would metastasize unchecked, cult empires would bloom within the carcass of the Imperium, and countless worlds would be swallowed not merely by conquest, but by spiritual annihilation. Yet their salvation so often arrives with a second purge attached to it, that gratitude becomes almost obscene. To be rescued by the Grey Knights may mean to be silenced forever afterward. To fight beside them may mean death for knowing they were real. To watch them banish a demon may be to witness the last true thing your mind will ever hold before sanctioned hands scour it clean. In this there is no contradiction with the wider Imperium. Rather, the Grey Knights embody it perfectly. They are merciful only by the standards of extinction. They preserve mankind by mutilating its memory. They keep the species alive by denying it the truth of what it survives against. They are the purest possible expression of the secret war, and the secret war is a thing of impossible victories purchased at intolerable cost. Yet doctrine alone is not enough to explain such a chapter. Behind the faceless machinery of banishment, containment, and sanctioned forgetting stand warriors whose names have become half liturgy and half warning within the sealed traditions of Titan. Janus, first, among them. Drago, the wandering scourge of the warp. Crow, who bears corruption without yielding to it. Voldus, Stern, Hyperion, and others besides, each carrying in his flesh and memory some shard of what the Grey Knights truly are. To understand the secret war in full, one must at last turn from the doctrine to the men who made it legend. In the hidden annals of Titan, greatness is never clean. It does not arrive garlanded in triumph, nor preserved in the manner of the Imperium's public saints, whose images are polished by distance and sermon until all burden is mistaken for glory. The greatest of the Grey Knights are remembered instead as men crushed beneath rarer and darker obligations than almost any other servants of the throne. Their names endure, yes, but not as simple laurels. Each one is attached to some immense and private strain, some relic that must be borne, some curse that must be mastered, some silence that must never be broken. To pass through the higher legends of the chapter is therefore not to walk a gallery of heroes in the common sense, but to enter a mausoleum of burdens. At the head of that grim procession stands Janus, the first supreme Grand Master, founder lord of the chapter and living symbol of its heresy-born origin. When Malcador could no longer remain upon Titan, and the last desperate preparations of that age gave way to the Emperor's mortal struggle, it was Janus whom the Sigillite appointed to lead the secret Brotherhood into its first true age. Later traditions identify him with Revuel Arvida, and through the strange alchemy of the heresy with the being once called Eanius, binding the Grey Knights forever to the broken twilight in which the old legions died and the hidden wars of the new Imperium began. Janus matters not only because he was first, but because he embodies the chapter's deepest contradiction. The first lord of the demon hunters emerged from the same age that had proven how vulnerable even the emperors, gene-forged sons, could be to corruption and catastrophe. In him, the Grey Knights remember that they were born not from order, but from ruin, not from institutional confidence, but from the absolute necessity of a species staring into the warp and realizing too late what had been staring back. From Janus, the line descends through forgotten centuries of sealed grandmasters, until it reaches the figure who now dominates Grey Knight legend more than any other, Lord Kaldor Drago, the current and 48th Supreme Grandmaster of the chapter. Drago is one of those rare Warhammer figures whose lore borders upon the mythic without ever entirely surrendering its core function. He is not a wandering demigod, detached from the chapter's purpose. He is, rather, that purpose carried to such an extreme that ordinary distinctions between campaign history and saga begin to blur. Drago bears the Titan's Sword, the relic Nemesis Force Sword, wielded by the Supreme Grand Master since the Grey Knight's founding, a blade psychically attuned to each new bearer and remembered as anathema to demonkind. He is also the chapter's most visible emblem of what demon war can cost even its victors. His feud with Mortarion and his long exile within the warp have turned him into a figure who seems half legend and half recurring impossibility, a Night Lord cursed to wage battle within the very hellscape his chapter exists to oppose. Yet that is precisely why he belongs so centrally in the Grey Knight's story. Drago does not transcend the chapter's anti-demon office. He radicalizes it. In him, the hidden war ceases to be only a chain of deployments and banishments, and becomes instead a vision of endless pursuit, a silver blade still cutting even after the battlefield has collapsed into nightmare. The Grey Knight's legends often hover at the edge of the impossible because the foes they face are themselves impossible, and Drago is the clearest proof of that truth. If Drago represents the epic scale of Grey Knight legend, then Garin Crow represents its intimate torment. He is Castellan champion of the Purifiers and the current Warden of the Blade, bearer of the Blade of Antwyr, perhaps the most notorious Chaos relic not destroyed by the chapter, but retained under direct and terrible guard. The weapon is a demon blade, a thing so malign and spiritually predatory that it cannot be simply broken and cast aside. Instead, it must be born, denied, mastered in the narrowest possible sense by being used without ever yielding to its deeper promises. Crow does not draw upon the blade's otherworldly power, because to do so would imperil his soul. This is what makes him so essential to any understanding of Grey Knight purity. Crow proves that purity is not a condition admired from a distance. It is a constant and intimate act of refusal. The chapter's incorruptibility is tested not in abstract sermons or ceremonial vows, but in moments like his, where a warrior of Titan clasps a demon weapon every day of his life and survives by never loving what it offers. Crow is not simply a famous Grey Knight because he is fierce. He is famous because he lives in permanent contact with temptation and remains himself. If Drago is the mythic outward face of the chapter, Crow is its inward ordeal, the proof that sanctity on Titan is not innocence, but sustained dominion over the thing closest to one's hand. Beyond such singular figures stand the active commanders, whose names remind us that the Grey Knights remain not merely a brotherhood of relic bearers and wandering legends, but a living chapter with current leaders, war councils, and battle responsibilities. Grandmaster Aldrich Voldus is one of the clearest examples of this enduring command cast. As Grandmaster of the Third Brotherhood and Warden of the Librarius, appointed to that office by Drago himself, and remembered as one of the most powerful psykers the Grey Knights have seen in centuries. Voldus stands at the intersection of martial authority and hidden scholarship. He is not just a battlefield lord, but a keeper of doctrine, charged with leading one of the chapter's most honored lines, while also standing guard over its deeper intellectual and psychic disciplines. Brother Captain Arvin Stern offers another face of that same burden. A veteran demon hunter of the Third Brotherhood, remembered in the lore as a prominent commander whose centuries of service have not dimmed either his lethality or his place among the chapter's renowned names, Stern embodies the severe continuity of Titan. Men such as Voldus and Stern matter because they prevent Grey Knight legend from floating away into pure abstraction. They show the chapter as it truly functions, through officers who must convert ancient burden into present action, who must command strike forces, read omens, preserve the old rites, and still walk unflinching into breach zones where the warp has already begun to devour causality. Then there is Hyperion, and with him the Grey Knights become, for a brief and unusually human instant, almost personal. Through the Emperor's gift, the chapter is seen not only through institutional grandeur, but through the eyes of one shaped by recruitment, training, first battle and aftermath into a true son of Titan. Hyperion's significance is not merely that he later becomes notable, but that his story grants a more intimate angle on what Grey Knight life actually feels like from within. The traditions of the chapter, so often described in the language of sealed archives and apocalyptic doctrine, acquire weight in the rhythm of an individual consciousness. In wider lore, Hyperion is remembered as a survivor of the First War for Armageddon, where his psychic might help shatter Angron's Black Blade, and as one who later rose to the office of prognosticar. But it is the perspective he offers that matters most in this gallery of burdens. Through him, one sees the Grey Knights not only as a legendary engine of anti-demon war, but as a brotherhood forged out of erased memory, pitiless training, and the permanent emotional aftermath of knowing truths that the wider Imperium must never fully learn. Hyperion reminds us that every cold doctrine of Titan is lived by someone, that every ward and oath and secret purge is born not by abstractions, but by minds made hard enough to survive them. The relics associated with these men deepen the monastic and unfinished quality of Grey Knight lore still further. The Titan's Ward, carried now by Drago and handed down through the Supreme Grand Masters since the chapter's earliest age, is not simply a prestigious weapon. It is dynastic in the most secretive and spiritual sense, linking each Lord of Titan to the unresolved continuity of the hidden war. The Blade of Antwyr, by contrast, is a relic of confinement and burden, a weapon preserved because it cannot be safely permitted elsewhere, and whose existence transforms its bearer into a living prison as much as a champion. Above both of these looms the most mysterious sanction of all, the Terminus Decree, an ancient parchment locked away within the Chamber of Purity on Titan, known only to the Supreme Grand Masters, and said to be a secret so immense it could either save mankind in its darkest hour or bring the Imperium to its knees. There is no better summary of Grey Knight's atmosphere than this. Their greatest relics are not trophies of closure. They are instruments of unresolved duty. Each carries forward a burden not yet discharged. Each points towards some future crisis still to come. In that sense, the Grey Knights are uniquely monastic and uniquely apocalyptic at once. Their lives are ordered by ritual, hierarchy, relic and vow, yet every such thing is aimed towards some final emergency, some hour of terminus, some hidden reckoning still withheld from the galaxy. So this chapter cannot end as a mere roll call of names, because the names only matter once they are placed back into the furnace that made them. Janus, Drago, Crow, Voldus, Stern, Hyperion, each is in his own way an answer to a different burden of demon war. One bears the wound of the heresy in his very identity. One is exiled into myth and still fights on. One grips a demon blade every day and refuses it. One commands with the weight of the librarius upon him. One persists through centuries of direct anti-demon service. One lets us see the chapter from within, as initiation becomes lifelong burden. Together, they form not a pageant of greatness, but a reliquary of costs. And if one campaign must be chosen to reveal those costs at their most complete, where secrecy, sacrifice, anti-demon purpose, and the moral filth of necessary victory all collide, then the path leads inexorably to Armageddon. There Angron walked. There Grey Knights bled in the open glare of a world that could never be permitted to remember all it had seen. There, Hyperion first truly entered legend. There the hidden war ceased to be cleanly hidden, and the salvation of mankind curdled almost immediately into purges, silences, and shame. Armageddon is where the burdens of Titan converge, and it is there that the Grey Knight's secret purpose is perhaps revealed most completely by the terrible price of fulfilling it. When Angron came to Armageddon, the world ceased to be merely a war zone and became a wound in reality. There are invasions that can be met with steel, attrition, artillery, and faith shouted loudly enough to drown fear for a little while. This was not one of them. This was not an orc crusade, nor a rebel uprising, nor some Xenos predation that could be contained by quarantine lines and fleet cordons. A demon Primarch had manifested upon Imperial soil. One of the Emperor's own lost sons, swollen now with the favor of the Blood God, strode at the head of a tide of slaughter so vast and so spiritually diseased that common language begins to fail in its description. The sky above Armageddon became a red vault of omen and murder. The earth shook beneath the tread of the war host. Men did not merely die. They were spiritually unmade by terror before axe or claw ever found them. At such an hour there could be no honest pretense that ordinary imperial resistance, no matter how brave, could answer the scale of the abomination. This was a crisis for the hidden blade alone. This was the kind of war for which the Grey Knights had been made. So the call went to Titan, and from Titan came not a grand public crusade, but a secretive and exacting response, an ad hoc force of Grey Knights assembled under Brother Captain Taramar Aurelian. There is something profoundly fitting in that detail. The Grey Knights do not always arrive as one vast and ceremonially perfect host. They arrive as necessity demands, under whatever command structure the Black Emergency permits, gathered into a weapon sharp enough for the breach before them. Taramar did not march to Armageddon as a lord of pageantry. He came as a killer of demons, bearing the impossible duty of meeting a being that no mortal army could truly claim to stop. With him came battle brothers, already shaped by the disciplines of Titan, men for whom banishment was as natural as bolter drill, whose silver armor was inscribed not for glory, but for warding, and whose minds had been trained to stand where reality itself had begun to buckle. Among them was Hyperion, young by Grey Knight measure, and not yet the figure later lore would remember, but already marked for that brutal education which only true demon war can bestow. The force that descended upon Armageddon was not large by the standards of planetary war. It was simply precise, and in the presence of Angron, precision mattered more than mass. The battle that followed is one of the clearest proofs that even the Grey Knights do not win cleanly, nor cheaply, nor in any way a romantic imagination would dare call triumphant. To face a demon Primarch is not to duel a larger champion. It is to confront a catastrophe wearing a body. Angron was not merely powerful. He was a concentration of wrath vast enough to deform the battlefield around him, a black scripture of hate hammered into muscle, brass, and empiric fire. Around him, the World Eaters and the blood-maddened hordes of Khorne turned the soil of Armageddon into sacrificial mire. The Grey Knights struck where their doctrine always compels them to strike, at the heart rather than the edges, but the heart here was a mountain of murder and blasphemy. Taramar Aurelian led his brothers into that furnace, knowing that the task was not to kill in any final mortal sense, for such creatures do not grant so merciful an answer. The task was banishment. The task was to break the manifestation, sever the hold, drive the beast shrieking back into the Imperium, and buy the Imperium a reprieve written in blood. Such victory is always a negative thing. It means the world has not yet been devoured. It means the wound has been sealed for now. It means the dead may be counted because the living still exist to count them. And the cost was appalling. Grey Knights fell beneath the fury of Angron and his host. Sanctified plate was split. Nemesis blades shattered demon flesh only for their bearers to be cut down in answering storms of impossible violence. This is one of the reasons the First War for Armageddon remains so central to the chapter's legend. It strips away any foolish belief that the Grey Knights passed through demon war untouched, like silver saints immune to consequence. They endure. They prevail often enough to keep mankind alive. But they pay for it, and Armageddon demanded an especially terrible reckoning. Taramar Aurelian himself perished in the struggle, his leadership ending not in repose or monument, but in the kind of sacrificial extinction that so often marks the highest offices of Titan. If one wishes to understand the Grey Knights honestly, one must linger there for a moment. Their commanders do not stand behind the line issuing ornate orders. They go where the veil is thinnest. They die where the war is most infernal. Aurelian did not survive his triumph, because Grey Knight triumph is rarely shaped that way. He helped make the banishment possible, and that was enough for the chapter to remember him with reverence. Hyperion survived, and because he survived the war, acquires another dimension, something more intimate than apocalyptic tableau. Through him, and the later memory of his life, Armageddon ceases to be only a campaign entry in sealed archives, and becomes instead a felt human cost, insofar as a Grey Knight can still be called human after Titan has finished remaking him. He witnessed the magnitude of what it means to fight a demon Primarch. He saw brothers fall, saw ordinary Imperial servants burn in the periphery of a war they could not fully comprehend, saw victory, measured not by banners planted, but by the temporary cessation of metaphysical horror. Later traditions remember that his psychic strength played a decisive role in the struggle, and later still, he would become one of the most memorable voices through which the Grey Knights are understood. That matters, because Hyperion lets Armageddon breathe as more than abstract grandeur. He carries it as trauma, memory, and burden. Through him, the campaign is felt not just as a strategic success, but as a scar within the soul of the chapter. For to banish Angron was victory only in the bleakest Imperial sense. Armageddon survived. That is true. Mankind endured another night. That also is true. Yet the soil was sodden with slaughter, the defenders broken, the survivors contaminated at least in memory by knowledge no common citizen of the Imperium was meant to bear. This is the point where Grey Knight history becomes unbearable to those who wish for simpler heroism. When the battlefield went quiet, when the howls of the blood tide had faded and Angron had been hurled back into the warp, a second war began. It was not fought against demons, though demons had caused it. It was fought against memory, witness, and the strategic terror of truth. The Inquisition, with the Grey Knights as its chamber militant and its most terrible answer to the demonic, moved to contain what had happened. Survivors could not simply be permitted to go free, carrying tales of a manifested Primarch of the Warp and the Silver Warriors who had answered him. The old logic of Titan asserted itself with ruthless force. Secrecy must be maintained, knowledge must be strangled, witnesses must be cleansed, silenced, or destroyed. Thus began the infamy remembered as the months of shame. It is difficult to overstate how perfectly this aftermath encapsulates the Grey Knights and the Imperium they serve. Here was the apocalyptic threat in its purest form. Here was the absolute necessity of the hidden chapter. Without them, Armageddon would likely have been lost, not merely as a world, but as a spiritual ruin from which no recovery could be meaningfully imagined. Yet once salvation had been achieved, moral ugliness followed almost immediately in its wake. The surviving regiments, laborers, militia, and civilians of Armageddon became not grateful recipients of deliverance, but liabilities in a secrecy calculus. Some would be sterilized and sent to death camps. Others would be executed. Others would vanish into the oubliettes of inquisitorial logistics. And though the Grey Knights themselves are not reducible to the Inquisition's every excess, they stood too close to that machinery to escape the stain of it. Their very existence is bound to such decisions. They save mankind from truths it cannot bear, and then they participate in ensuring mankind never openly learns what it was saved from. It was here that the Space Wolves entered the tale as the great and furious exception. The sons of Fenris, never inclined to bow meekly before cold bureaucratic atrocity, came to know of the Grey Knights through this crisis and set themselves against the merciless handling of Armageddon's survivors. Their defiance tore the veil in a way almost nothing else in Imperial history had managed. The hidden war became visible, at least to another chapter, not through revelation granted in trust, but through outrage, bloodshed, and refusal. That conflict only deepens the Grey Knights' tragedy. They were right to answer Angron. They were necessary. Yet necessity had led them to a point where the line between savior and executioner became almost impossible for outsiders to distinguish. Armageddon is therefore perhaps the perfect Grey Knight story because it refuses all easy comfort. There is no version of it in which the world can be saved and innocents remain intact. There is only the lesser damnation chosen over the greater. And still, for all that shame, the chapter endures into the present age, through the 41st millennium, and into the dark convulsions of the 42nd, as mankind's hidden shield against demonkind. Warp breaches continue to tear open across the stars. Cults continue to ripen in underhives, shrine vaults, and void decks. Rogue psychers continue to hear voices they mistake for destiny. The Great Rift has widened the old nightmare and turned whole regions of space into hunting grounds for the infernal. Through all of this, the Grey Knights continue their silent labor. They descend without fanfare, kill the summoners, banish the manifested, burn the tainted, and vanish again behind curtains of sanctioned denial. No cathedral choir sings their victories in the open. No vast avenue on Terra is lined with statues of the Brothers of Titan. The Imperium cannot celebrate them honestly, because to do so would be to admit too much about the abyss pressing forever at the edge of human existence. That is the final cruelty, and perhaps the final proof of what they are. The Grey Knights are not merely secret space marines, nor merely an elite anti-demon chapter hidden behind inquisitorial seals. They are the locked door between mankind and the warp. They are the last ward hammered into the threshold while the house burns around it. They stand where reality gives way, where prayer curdles into invocation, where the blood gods and plague lords and whispering architects and princes of excess reach out through torn creation seeking entrance. The Imperium can never truly praise them, because the truths they fight are the truths it most fears to name. So they remain in silence, in argent, in secrecy, in endless war. And perhaps that is fitting, for a locked door is rarely loved. It is simply the thing that keeps the horror on the other side, and in the age of the Imperium, there is no service more necessary, nor more thankless than that.